Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel. We rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 10, Casual Soul Realm Assault Trip. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happens within this episode. Don films an episode of his reality show as a spirit hunter at a hospital that happens to be in Karakura Town, where our main characters are from. But due to being human and not aware of the Shinigamis and souls and how all of that works, he ends up accidentally creating a hollow that Ichigo then has to interfere and defeat. So once I've rewatched an episode, I then rank the episode on two lists, a mostly objective list, and then a personal list as well. So we'll start with our mostly objective rank values. The first is that we have a multi-arc supporting character introduction, which is Don Kanonji, who is a medium who's able to see souls and spirits, and once Ichigo turns into a Shinigami, it's revealed that he can also see Shinigami as well. And he also has an attack with spiritual power called the Kanonji style final super attack Cannonball, which is the tiniest little speck of spiritual power. We then have his introduction is worth 3 points. We then have our multi-arc main character development, which basically applies to pretty much all of our main characters. Basically, when they first arrive at the hospital, there is a soul inside of it that starts to scream because its territory has been invaded. And we see that Tatsuki and Orihime, Chad, Karen, and Yuzu, as well as, of course, Rukia and Ichigo, are all able to hear the screaming. But those who are around them, for example, Chad's with the other two friends that I never remember the names of Ichigo, they don't hear it. And obviously the dad at this point is always a bit iffy for me because I know the future, and I'm like, how does the dad not hear it? But apparently he doesn't hear it, even though Yuzu and Karen are able to. And so that indicates that people with high spiritual energy or who have had contact with hollows and Shinigami in the past are able to hear the screams, and that is worth 4 points. We also then have an additional 4 points for world building, and there's quite a bit that takes place within this episode. So we have the Jibakure, which are spirits bound to the earth or who have like assimilated to the earth, and Rukia explains that when somebody dies in a place that they have very strong regrets about, the chain that's connected to their chest, instead of hanging freely like with normal spirits that a soul Shinigami would Hanso and send to Soul Society, it instead attaches itself to the earth, binding the spirit by its regrets to the earth and the place where the regrets are held. In this case, it is a hospital. And then, because it is assimilated to the earth, it is not easily detected by Shinigami, and so they often aren't found before they devolve into hollows, as they are only visible when humans or others invade their territory, which is, of course, the place that they hold the regrets to, in this case, the haunted hospital. We then also learn that there are demi-hollows, and basically a full hollow is someone whose chain has been completely lost and they have a hole in their chest, which, according to Rukia, indicates that they have lost their heart, which then basically devolves them into a creature of pure instinct, and the actual white shields of the hollow mask are basically the protective thing for the bared instincts, which honestly I don't understand how that works. And that shields them from the outside world. And basically a demi-hollow, the chain hasn't fully separated yet. Alright, so I had to let my dog out. I did stop recording. I'm not 100% sure where I left off, but I think we were still in the world building section. And basically, we were talking about, I believe, how for hollows, Ruki explains that the white mask that's over their face is to shield their bared instincts from the outside world. I'm not really sure what that means. I think that may be a translation issue where maybe in English we don't really have a concept for what they're talking about. Because I mean, like, instincts are non-visible anyways, so they wouldn't need it to be shielded by a mask. And if she's talking more about like the expression on the face due to the savagery of the bared instincts, then maybe that's what it means, is it's hiding that savagery, but then the masks also look kind of scary, so I don't know how good a job they're actually doing about that, but apparently that's what the white masks mean. I don't really get it, like I said. And then we also learn that when a demi-hollow transforms fully into a full hollow, they will disperse, making it look like they've been defeated, and then they will reform elsewhere, but as they're usually bound to the place of their regrets, it most likely would be elsewhere within the place of their regrets, which we do see in this episode when the Jibakure ends up having its hole opened by Don Kanonji. We then see that it does disperse and then reforms up on the roof before then attacking Ichigo and Don. And so, with our calculations, where were we here? We were at 11, and there is one negative, or at least one main negative, which is that this is really a filler episode. It doesn't really have much significance to a main plot at all. It's kind of like a side quest for this reality show filming that Ichigo gets caught up in. We do learn some things about the world in it, but ultimately, it's filler. And objectively, filler episodes, because they give nothing to the main plot, are ultimately unnecessary in a show, which is why it's worth a negative 4 points. And so that then brings us to 7 out of 10 for our mostly objective ranking of this episode. So as a reminder of our arc rankings so far, in first place we have The Day I Became a Shinigami, The Shinigami's Work, The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish, Fight to the Death, Ichigo vs. Ichigo, June 17th, Memories in the Rain, 6th, Unbeatable Enemy, 7th, Greetings from a Stuffed Lion, Beat the Invisible Enemy. This episode is 9th, Casual Soul Realm Assault Trip, and then in 10th place we have Cursed Parakeet. So now it comes to my personal ranking. And while objectively a filler episode has no value to the plot and therefore doesn't need to exist and is worth minus 4 points, for me personally, I tend to find that the filler episodes tend to be the most entertaining episodes, filled with the most comedy, filled with the most fun, and therefore personally, I really like filler episodes a lot of the time. In fact, with this one, I felt like there was only 2 negatives for me personally that didn't really fit on the objective list. And one of those is that there was a bit of a nonlinear timeline at the start. We open the episode on the crowd gathering with everybody for this show and the entrance of Don at the opening of his show onto the stage that's set up with the narrator announcer who talks about what Don's doing and such. And then we randomly go to like a few days previous where some of the other students were doing this wahaha movement. with like their arms crossed and then like yelling "Bwahaha" is the movement that I'm talking about. And or Hime doing that when Ichigo enters the classroom, and so does his friends and everything like that. And I understand why they did flashback a bit, but I don't really like nonlinear timelines. I like things to follow in a specific pattern or be like a flashback in the moment that it's relevant. Like for example, later in the episode as they're moving from one location where the stage is over to where Dawn is actually going to be facing the spirit, they Orihime comes up to Ichigo and apologizes because she found out from Tatsuki that he doesn't actually like spirit hunters and that type of program, and she didn't know that, and that's why she was apologizing for doing the movement and when he entered the classroom the other day. Except the random flashback scene was like way before this one, and then they had the stage thing, and it would have made more sense if either they started on that scene and then we're like 2 days later at the place, so it's following a linear timeline, or at the time when she apologized and he asks, "What are you apologizing about?" At that point, we then went to the flashback and then forward because it would have been relevant to that scene. The fact that it just was randomly like the second scene and there was no like real indication even that it was a flashback, it just kind of flip-flopped. Nah, I didn't like it. But that's a minor thing and a personal preference. The other one was secondhand embarrassment, which is essentially when Ichigo realizes that Dawn is actually opening up the hollow's partially opened hole in order to create a full hollow. Ichigo like runs forward without switching into a Shinigami first in order to tell him to stop, which of course brings security down on him and he ends up like flattened under multiple of the security agents, and then Harukia comes to try to like bop his soul out of his body, and she gets covered by security agents until finally Kurihara, the store owner, uses his cane to bop Ichigo's Shinigami form out of his body, which makes his body look like it faints, and then his store assistant Tessai comes over and picks up Ichigo and says he'll take care of it from the security agents who are confused but like don't stop him. And then Ichigo is then invisible to most and able to help out, though of course Dawn does see him. So even though those two negatives exist and I wanted to mention them, I don't think they had a huge impact on the score because ultimately this was a hilarious episode. I laughed out loud so many times throughout this episode, and it was just all around the most entertaining episode to date. There were tons of comedic moments. There was a point when Rukia didn't know what the festival was about, but was going along with it anyways, just for the fun of it. There's, of course, everybody doing the same movement, and that movement repeats throughout. I also found that when Ichigo is trying to fight the Hollow that the Dawn has created, the Dawn thinks he is a little boy fan of, like, a fan spirit of his, and he keeps trying to interfere. And it's one of those things, when the characters, they have such a large sense of pride that even though they're completely out of their depth, they're going forward, like they're the leader, they know what to do, follow me. Meanwhile, they're going in like the completely wrong direction type thing. It's one of those funny moments where he's just constantly like Ichigo's trying to fight, and then he has to keep like pulling the Dawn out of the way and be like, Dawn, let me fight here. And then, of course, there's when they're fighting. So basically, Ichigo then gets kind of over it and they're fighting in front of people and he basically grabs Dawn and drags him inside of the hospital. And this of course is when we um get Dawn's sort of backstory of how the reason that he fights the spirits and does his show is because 25%, 1 in 4 people, watch his show. Most of them are children, and he is the hero character standing up to the spirits. And this, of course, gives Ichigo a sense of awe in him, and you get like the sunlight streaming through even though it's nighttime sort of scenario. And then Ichigo, and then he basically says he has to go back and fight, and then Ichigo tells him that the reason he dragged him inside is so that the audience wouldn't get hurt, because obviously the hollow is quite dangerous. And so they're fighting inside, and then Ichigo's sword gets, which I still think is overcompensating for something, gets stuck into the wall, and he can't get it out. And then he gets the sticky stuff, like a sticky phlegm from the hollow's throat, on him, basically gluing him to his sword. And then his sword, he finally gets it out of the wall, only for it to stick inside the hollow's shoulder. And if you've been following along, you know that this author has a thing for shoulder injuries, and I will call it out every time because it's literally every episode. If somebody is getting injured, it is the shoulder. I don't know why. Anyways, he gets stuck in the hollow, and then eventually the hollow breaks free. They end up on the roof, and then Ichigo ends up stuck to the railing of the roof. And this is when Don Kanonji decides that he is going to use his super powerful cannonball thing in order to free him while standing up to the hollow, even though he acknowledges their power difference like a true hero would. And it's got this epic name, and it's this tiny little ball. And what's even worse, or better, I should say, is the epic music that plays for all the big attacks is playing for this tiny little speck of power that he's casting to break up the phlegm. Oh my god, it was so funny. And then at the end, they're congratulating each other, and Dawn is like calling him like his friend and his comrade as Ichigo defeats the Hollow. Dawn has a bit of a crisis when he realizes that he's been going around to the spirits, and he thought when he opened up their chests that he was saving them because he would see them disperse, but he'd never seen them reform till now. When Ichigo defeats it, it reveals that it was the spirit that he did, and that he's been leaving hollows apparently around all over the place. Because he's been turning all the demi-hollows into hollows, thinking he was dispersing the spirits and exorcising them. Oops. And then basically Ichigo comforts him, and he gets demoted from friend and comrade to Don Kanonji's #1 pupil. Instead. And that's kind of where we leave the episode, is on that funny moment of his demotion. And honestly, it was comedy from start to finish pretty much, and whatever negatives there were, they weren't enough. And this is the first 10 out of 10 episode, I think, for this series. That's what I've decided, because it was just gold. I was so entertained the entire episode. And so that then brings our updated personal ranking list to, in first place this episode, Casual Soul Realm Assault Trip. Then The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish, Beat the Invisible Enemy, The Shinigami's Work, Cursed Parakeet. In sixth, we have Unbeatable Enemy. Then we have June 17th, Memories in the Rain. The Day I Became a Shinigami in eighth. 9 is Greetings from a Stuffed Lion, and then in 10th place is Fight to the Death, Ichigo versus Ichigo. And now we come to our final segment, which is the series ranking so far, where we are going to be ranking each of the arcs against each other. And for our Agent of the Shinigami arc, we now are adding 7 on our mostly objective ranking for a total of 88 out of 200. And then on the personal ranking, we are adding a full 10 for a total of 63 out of 200. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami arc, episode 10, Casual Soul Realm Assault Trip. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.